Hello, I am introing this video from the future of the clip that you're about to see. Basically, I've been doing these COSMERE implications videos in parts so far. So I did a part 1, which I will link, and a part 2, which I will link. And then I was reading part 3 and there weren't that many references, and I filmed a clip for that, so I will insert that here. It's been a while since I finished the last vlog, so I'm a pretty decent way through part 3 already. I was away, and so I just didn't get a chance to update this vlog or start it and keep it updated. So we're going back a fair way in this first clip, so apologies in advance, but we got some stuff to talk about. So part 3 starts on page 575 and I am currently on page 752. So not quite 200 pages, but getting pretty close. So Eurytheru has been occupied. We started off with the scene with Kaladin sneaking around trying to avoid the pursuer. It was all very tense and exciting. I like this part a lot. There's a lot going on, but there aren't quite as many COSMERE implications in this section, I don't think. I'm half tempted to combine this with part 4 because I feel like these two sections of the book are just so much about the plot of this book that there's less COSMERE stuff happening, but we'll see. So there is a mention, Raboniel mentions Oral Celeste, which we know is aluminium, and it interfering with connection. So we know that aluminium in Scadrial, when used by a Mistborn, gets rid of any metal reserves. We know that in Roshar it is used to interfere with investiture or stop investiture from working when applied, and that's how they get the fourth bridge to work. And then Raboniel is confirming that it interferes with connection as well, so really interesting. Then there's a section where Dalinar and Nail are speaking, and Dalinar touches Nail and forges a connection with him and sees into his past and kind of sees an image of the Oath Pact and wonders if that means that he can reform the Oath Pact. I've marked it as pink. I don't actually remember why I marked it as pink, but I did. So if I can remember why, editing me will write it on screen. If not, I guess we'll all never know. So then we're in one of the flashback scenes to Eshonai and Venli's past, and in this scene Eshonai is talking with a woman who's described as having lots of rings on her fingers. So she is a Terrace woman and ferrochemist, I believe. Axindweth, is that her name? Let me just check. Yeah, Axindweth is her name. And we don't really know what her deal is yet, but she's a world hopper, clearly. Then there's this whole thing, okay, where we're in Navani's perspective and she's talking to Raboniel, and no, she's talking to the sibling, gosh, words. And the sibling says, I have been wounded. Thousands of years ago, something happened that changed the singers. It hurt me too. Navani covered her shock. You're speaking of the binding of that unmade, which made the singers lose their forms. Yes, that terrible act touched the souls of all who belong to Roshar. Spren too. So this is talking about when Bar Ado Mishram was imprisoned, and we don't necessarily know how or why this happened, why this was done, but we know that it had something to do with the Knights Radiant, and it had something to do with the Heralds, and it happened around the same time as the Recreants, which is interesting because the Parshmen were formed as a result of this event. So all of the listeners, singers? Yes, all of the singers. So basically they entered slave form, and around the same time the recreants happened and the Spren all went dead-eye, we find out later in the book that they agreed to that. They were part of that decision. So something's happened to the Spren, making them dead-eyes. Around the same time, Bar Ado Mishram was imprisoned. We don't know how or why. And the Parshmen were created. So I don't know, something about that seems relevant to me, but I haven't figured out what. And they're also talking about types of light, and that led me to doing some investigation of light, and I discovered that anti-light is anti-investiture. So if anti-light is the Rasharan form of anti-investiture and it exists everywhere in the COSMERE, then I would presume that hemalurgy is the anti-investiture of Scadrial. And again, it's been mentioned that hemalurgy is going to be important within the COSMERE, so maybe this is why. Maybe it's anti-investiture that is actually important, and it just so happens that hemalurgy is the form of it in Scadrial, and maybe, well, and then anti-light is the form of it in Roshar. Then they're talking about the fact that Lift is awake, and that's because she has been made oddly, as the sibling describes it, because she uses life light to use her surges, because she was created by cultivation. So that is just a little thing, a little Roshar thing. I think that we haven't really learnt too much about cultivation yet, but I feel like it's going to be important, so I've tabbed it just in case I need to come back to it later. Then Venli is in the next kind of flashback talking to the two Axindweth, so she shows up again. And then Venli notices that one of the other Windrunners is close to being awake, so clearly the fact that they have access to the Surge of Adhesion, which is of honour only, is having some impact on the level of interference this corruption of the sibling is having on Radiance. Then Raboniel is speaking with Mairead, who has his AVR with him, and I think, it's not really confirmed, but I think that he gives Raboniel a Sion, because he stepped forward and respectfully handed her a large pouch. Raboniel took it and it made a soft clink. Raboniel undid the top and stared inside. She sat there for a long moment, and when she next spoke, her voice was devoid of rhythms. How? Where did you get this? I bring a gift, was all the man said, to encourage you to meet with my Babsk to negotiate terms. I had thought to wait until the current turmoil subsided, but my Babsk is determined. We will have a deal for use of the Oath Gates, and we will pay. It is a fine gift, Raboniel said. So actually maybe it's not a Sion, it's something off-world. I don't know what though. Maybe we find out later, I can't remember. And then the epigraphs, which are from the in-book book, Rhythm of War, which are actually Navani's notes from her time during this occupation, they start mentioning sand, which is from Teldane. So there's a couple of mentions of the sand in the epigraphs so far. I think it is mentioned again later in the book, but I can't remember for sure. But it is mentioned twice so far. And then Syl is telling Kaladin about that conversation that she had with Dalinar, where she asked him to use his powers to help her understand Kaladin's depression better. And she says, I'm my own person, Kaladin. I can make decisions for myself. She stared sightlessly past Teft and Kaladin. It was in talking to him that I started to remembering my old night, like I told you. I think Dalinar did something. I wanted him to connect me to you. He refused, but I think he somehow connected me to who I was, made me able to remember and hurt again. So that suggests that Dalinar is able to do something with connection, and I'm increasingly thinking that those visions that he heard from Honor saying unite them, rather than talking about the Radiance or even humans and the Parshendi, I'm starting to wonder if it actually was a reference to the shards in general and, you know, reforming Adenalcium, maybe. I don't know, but that's a theory I have. Anywho, that brings us bang up to date with where I am. Not so much, as I mentioned, in this part so far, but I will carry on and we'll see how much footage I have when I get to the end of part 3, which isn't far away now, and then I might just include part 4 in this as well. We shall see. Welcome back. Now I have finished the book, and there really weren't that many references in the last 3 parts, so 3, 4 and 5 of Rhythm of War, and I suppose that makes sense because it was really much more plot and character focused for those sections of the book. So rather than do possibly really boring vlogs for those 3, I'm just doing a final check-in with the very, very few, I don't know if you can even tell, very few post-its, tabs that exist from where I left off last time, which was page 752. So I have finished this book now, loved it still, and I'm going to take you through the things that I did notice, but as I mentioned, there just weren't that many, to be honest, in this section of the book, which again makes total sense, to be honest. So there wasn't anything else in part 3. Then we get to the next set of interludes, and the first one is Seth using Nightblood, which of course is a Warbreaker reference anyway. And then we got into part 4. So there's another Warbreaker reference early on in part 4 by referencing Nalthis specifically, as well as Azia, who of course we know is Vivenna. We've known that since Words of Radiance, I think. And then there's also reference to Mraize, Restaries, and a target who calls themselves 16. So I've marked that as potentially a Mistborn reference, but it could also be a Sixth of the Dusk reference. I'm not entirely sure. I don't know who 16 is yet, and as far as I could make out, it wasn't explored further in this book, so I guess we'll watch out for that in book 5. Then we move forward and we're back with Shallan, and she's using the cube, so once again a reference to a Sion, and I can't remember if it was this bit specifically, I'll have tabbed it somewhere. There is a point eventually where Shallan opens the cube and actually meets the Sion, which of course is a Elantris reference also. Yeah, so that was my next tab, actually, was her having met the Sion itself. The Sion's name is... oh no, maybe it wasn't. Maybe that was later. I lied. Then there's a reference to Thydekar in her conversation with Mraize, who we know is Kelsier. Then there was an interesting section which was one of the flashback sections, but this one was from Eshonai's perspective, and it mentions a Spren following her home, so I'm guessing that she was actually pretty close to becoming Radiant herself, which is interesting, and I didn't notice that the first time that I read this one. In chapter 89, Voices of Light, is the first time that sand is mentioned, like, in the text other than in the epigraphs, because Raboniel gives Navani some sand to help her to identify investiture within spheres. Then we skip forward another chunk and there's another reference to Thydekar, and then there's another reference to Warbreaker where Wit is telling, well, I'll just read it to you actually. I once knew a man, Wit said, who was the finest gambler in all his realm. Where he lived, you make your cards walk themselves around the table by breathing life into them. He was the best. Intelligent, skilled with the breath of life, breath capital B, a shrewd gambler. He knew exactly how to bet and when. Everyone was waiting for the day when he lost, and eventually he did. So was using breath, so, or awakening specifically. And then there's this section where Moash and Teft are fighting, and Moash uses the sand to locate his spren, what's her name, Fenderana, so that he can kill her, and it's so sad. Oh, okay, so this is chapter 115, page 1195 of my copy, is when we finally meet the Sion, and their name was Aele, or is Aele? Not sure. I think it's maybe. And then there's another reference to Mistborn, where Wit is, well, Yasna is referencing a message from Wit to Thydekar / Kelsier, whatever, where she says, then tell his avatar something for me. Tell him we're done with his meddling. His influence over my people is finished. She hesitated, then sighed. Wit had asked nicely. Also, Wit says to tell him, deal with your own stupid planet, you idiot. Don't make me come over there and slap you around again. Oh, maybe it's Shallan, actually, that is having that conversation. It's Shallan, not Yasna. I presumed Yasna because they're together, but no, it's Shallan. And that's a reference to Secret History, so that's quite funny. Wit's always funny. And then the final tab that I have is in the epilogue, the scary, scary epilogue, where it says, Wit stared down a side hallway but then felt something, a tingling that made his breaths go wild. Breaths, capital B. And there's also reference in this chapter to Wit losing his perfect pitch, maybe. I am still kind of dubious about what happened in that epilogue, so I guess we'll see when we get to book 5. But that was my reread of Rhythm of War. This particular entry was a little bit more on the boring side, I think, so I'm really sorry about that. But the other 2 parts were really fun, so if you haven't seen those, then do go and give them a watch. And that's it for my reread. I really enjoyed it. I really love being in the Stormlight Archive. It's a book series that I adore. I really look forward to rereading the first 3 and picking up on those references. I will probably tab those, like this one, when I reread them next, which might not be for a while, to be fair, but I am really looking forward to doing that. Don't forget to check out Ponderful Books down in the description, and that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see more like this from me, then do think about hitting that subscribe button, and I hope to see you here again soon. Thanks, bye!